Okay.
Hi everyone, Leela Harris here with Kindi Gill. We're Dalian Method Facilitators, and this is episode 2 of our series on relationships. And today we're going to talk about conflict.
Very good topic.
Yeah, and this is a huge one, and I think it's really, it's a big one, but big in different ways for different people. Because how we deal with conflict or what happens is really good to look at and approach for what we need to do for ourselves.
For me, the definition of conflict is when you get yourself into an argument or where there's a point of difference with you and somebody else. And in my case, I can get into an argument relatively easily when it comes to my immediate family. Mm-hmm. But some people find it difficult to even consider being in conflict because the fear to disrupt something can be so huge that they'll keep their mouth sealed. And I know for sure that it's easier for me to have an argument with my husband than it is for me to have an argument with somebody outside of my immediate home. Because the idea of getting into a conflict, say with you, Leela, would be a much bigger bridge for me to go over than to get into an argument with my husband. How do you feel about that? Like, is conflict something that just happens naturally and easily with everybody equally, or does it differ depending on whose company you're in and what relationship it is?
Yeah, I was just looking at that, and it is different. But it's much less different these days for me.
Right.
It used to be huge. In fact, the people that I was close to, sometimes I would kind of like unload.
Right.
So then all that frustration, I would just take it out and then, go deal with people that I had the real problem with and not really, and it would come and I wouldn't even know why I would take it out on, the frustration. I wasn't even aware that it was actually this person that I was upset with and I need to go talk to them or this, but yeah, these days it's interesting because I feel good about that I can show my frustration in front of people much easier now. I used to not be able to show that. I used to be afraid to show that I'm tired, that I'm grumpy, that I'm like, all these things that are just like, that to me, it felt like rocking the boat. Right. So just like hide it all. And that's kind of a little bit of the environment I was raised in too, is that, like the men were angry and just blew off steam and the women were just like, you gotta
handle it.
Go argue with them, be nice. I don't know how many kids are told, be nice. Yeah. Especially women.
So, but now you're finding that you're able to handle, you're able to allow that sort of issue of conflict to arise anywhere.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot more of that. Maybe not always. There might be times where I don't feel comfortable like sharing, but for the most part, I noticed that I'm like, wow, I was just really grumpy in that moment. And I didn't hold it in. I didn't, it's like, and so, and another thing, and I hope I'm not going off topic. I'm just thinking of some of the women that I've had as clients and that I've worked with and in my own life where we're women and our inner terrain, I feel it's just the feminine itself just has such a like varied inner terrain as far as emotions, as far as moods. So there's, maybe not all women. I don't want to put that generalization because we are all different. And some of us have more masculine, some of us have more feminine, and that's great. But I feel the feminine energy is just like, you never know.
So my son
said, I don't even know.
Much more complex.
Oh yeah, and unpredictable.
Yeah, that's his phrase. It's much because I'm surrounded by women, and it's much more complex, and obviously must be confusing at times for him as a guy.
Probably because if he's in the logical, rational, it's probably going to seem complex, but really it's just unpredictable and it moves and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does get labeled as crazy. I remember that there was a book that was on Facebook recently, and it had a title in it, and it was alluding to the way that women seem to behave with their emotions and men. And I can't remember what the aspect was that they used for guys, but in the title it says how you deal with the crazy woman and then the something man. I can't remember what the word was that they had used. And so the label was crazy for the range of emotions that a female is going to experience. So for some, it becomes easier to go into that conflict. For others, it's harder because they're afraid of the conflict itself. But then the second thing is that once, say, for example, you're not afraid of the conflict itself and you're not suppressing yourself, now the conflict has arisen. At that point, there are many people that would just rush in to sort of say sorry.
Yeah.
Because it's this embarrassment over what's just arisen.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some other people that would just go into the dog-eared, I am right, and that's the way it is, right? But there is this third aspect where you could contemplate on what's just happened, because in that contemplation, there's an opportunity to learn something. And I know from my own experience, in my younger days, I had the I am right. I wouldn't even consider that I had to necessarily say something. I was right. And then slowly it started to adjust with maturity when I began to notice that I wasn't always right. So it still had that aspect of right or wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I would rush into the sorry when I felt like I was wrong. So it went from I'm always right to I could be right or wrong, and now I'm apologizing. And now I see that it's neither right nor wrong. It just is. And as it has unfolded, there's a trigger which needs healing. And that trigger could be mine or it could be the other person's. So first of all, there's some sort of contemplation to discern who does it belong to. And then once I know if it belongs to me, I then look deeper to see what it is that needs healing inside me so that a similar trigger doesn't necessarily arise. And that's where I tend to delve a little bit into, was there a need of mine that wasn't satisfied? And could that need have been dealt with myself rather than forcing it onto another person? Was there an expectation? And is this my expectation, or an expectation I've borrowed from my parents, or an expectation I've borrowed from society, or an expectation I've borrowed from somewhere else? And is there even any relevance to these expectations? And what can I do with that? Was there a judgment on my part? And if there was a judgment, does that come from a belief that I've picked up from somewhere? And is that judgment real? And what is that belief? And can that be dealt with? So the contemplation phase goes into a drill down of looking like, what is it that brought this trigger and this argument to arise? So that if I can go into that, I stand a better chance of seeing the fear that fueled this thing. Because ultimately, when I'm in an argument, I'm trying to control something to go my way. So why am I controlling it? It's because I'm afraid of something underneath. So I go down a drill down process. So I would argue that I'm being a little bit, I'm using the conflict as more of an opportunity of growth now, rather than a rigid, I'm holding on to my position and I'm right and you must be therefore wrong.
Yeah.
What about for yourself?
Mine is usually kind of looking at what is getting triggered inside of me, or if the time has passed, it's like, yeah, what got triggered inside of me? Mm-hmm. What was that? Because sometimes if it's intense in the moment, then I wasn't feeling it and I wasn't breathing and I wasn't looking in and watching, because I don't know if we've talked about this very much in our videos, Kindi and I, our practice is very much about watching and observing ourselves without judging, and just kind of, and that really opens up a lot of awareness. So in the situation, if we're unable to do that, then we know we've been triggered into something. We're identified. So then we work with it and we do the healing work. But Yeah, I think it's looking at, so what was that? What got triggered inside of me? Okay, was that, okay, I was afraid, and then I felt, oh, okay, and then I was afraid they were judging me, and then my mind was saying that was the wrong thing, and you're a bitch for saying that, just kind of looking at what was happening in that, and just kind of bringing more awareness to that. For some reason, that's really something about that helps me, because as soon as I do that, I can feel that there's space that opens up just by looking at that. If I'm unable to even do that, then when I'll do a Dalian method session, because then it's like too intense and I'm not like, yeah, there's something kind of shut down or in conflict inside.
And when I'm finding that if I do go down the path of needing to do a Dalian method session, that often if I've been triggered because I didn't like something in the other person, that I will discover that that same quality exists in me too.
Mm-hmm.
So the Dalian method then gives me more compassion for what was happening outside of me, because I've just now spotted with humility that that's going on inside me too. And then once I've seen that it's going on inside me too, and I get to the point of acceptance of it, then interestingly, the outside circumstance that was originally the cause of the argument stops happening. Mm-hmm. And I was really fascinated because I was hearing a colleague of mine from CAPS talking about the law of attraction recently whilst I was in Japan. I noticed one of his videos. It was a live video on Facebook. And I can't remember his exact background, but he was talking physics, and it wasn't really a topic that I've studied at school. But there was this total fascination that I had in this moment when he said that with, I think it's quantum physics, that they've discovered that if you concentrate on something and you look for it, it exists. But if you don't look for it, science, from a scientific point of view, they've proven that it doesn't exist. And so that is how the Dalian method seems to work, because when you're seeing something in another person and it's triggering you, clearly you're seeing it, so it exists. But when you come to the awareness that it is inside you too, and you get to the relaxation of accepting that quality inside you, now you're not looking for it anymore in another human being. And because you're not looking for it anymore in another human being, it disappears. It's not there anymore. So I was so thrilled when I heard, I think my friend from CAPS, his name is Ravi. I'm really, really like looking forward to talking to him about it, because obviously this is like what he studied at schooling and beyond. And I'm curious to know more, because that gave me the scientific explanation for why the same relationship will not display an old trait that was bothering you once you've been through a Dalian method session and you've integrated and healed that part inside you, and you've found your part of the story. It disappears. It stops happening outside of you.
Because, and that's the important part also, that we heal that in ourselves, which was affecting us, even though we weren't aware specifically, it was still affecting us.
Yeah.
But
I was so thrilled to see that there's a scientific reason for why it disappears. I was like, okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, because we're the mind always kind of thinks of life as static.
Yeah.
And then you have to maneuver around a static world, which is actually not true. Energetically, it's not reality. But if we think it's reality, it will be our reality, because then we'll feel helpless. Yeah. We're like, I can't do anything about it. And then we won't look for the ways to work with it. We won't be creative, even when it's, because I can be in a lot of pain and still be creative.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of, the mind it's just this kind of mindset. So when we open that up, it's like everything becomes shiftable. Everything becomes changeable. The same person, your relationship with that same person, or the situation, no matter how awful it seems, can totally turn around. Like, there's so many things that are possible from doing the inner work that would not be possible if we were just wrestling with it outwardly.
Yeah,
That's the
if you're
paradox.
wrestling with it outwardly, it's already
Inward that makes the change, and it's
yeah,
you have to kind of experience it to really see it. Like,
yeah. And it feels like magic in some ways.
it is. It's like living in a magical
It
world.
does, because
Yeah.
it's changed inside you. And because it's changed inside you, it's not vibrating out anymore. And as
Yeah.
it's not vibrating out anymore, there's no reason for it to manifest out here anymore. So therefore it disappears.
Yeah.
And it's just like you're uncreating all of the aspects of your relationship that are not working for you. Which, I mean, that just feels such a utopian place to be, because you have some authority over the quality of your life, because the quality of your life is really a byproduct of the quality of the energy that's inside you.
Yeah, and I think when people think, oh, am I going to discover that these things are in me, that all these people that drive me crazy,
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it would be very fun, but actually there's it's not really a place of judgment that happens. Like, even if we might feel, there might be an element of regret. Oh, I see that I've been doing this too, and I see how I've been doing it. There's also this relief, and compassion that happens. So the heart opens actually in these situations.
Yeah.
So the judgment doesn't build, and you don't. Yeah,
you just have more understanding for yourself, more understanding for the other human being, actually some degree of gratitude. They alerted you to something that you just didn't know existed.
Yeah, and you don't take it as personally. I take things much less personally now than I did 5 years ago, where someone would be in a bad mood and I would feel like, I remember feeling personally offended at these things, and now it's like, I don't feel that as much. It might happen in more personal situations, but in those, I just noticed that. It's like, wow, that has nothing to do with me. But if it does trigger me, then I know it's something to work with.
Right.
Yeah.
11 years ago, I read a book which was called The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. I don't know whether you read that.
I'm familiar with it.
You're familiar with it. And one of the agreements is that nothing anybody does is because of you. Mm-hmm. It's not personal. Basically, the agreement is saying that. And when I read that 11 years ago, that seemed incomprehensible, that nothing anybody does is because of you. It's all because of them. And now there's no aspect of me that has any other experience but that. So if somebody outside of me is triggered and nothing is happening inside me because it's their trigger, I don't even take it on, because I know it's not even personal. It has nothing to do with me. And I can sometimes even laugh at it and watch it and sort of entertain myself because it's somebody's in their own drama. But if I've got hooked in to their drama, then the minute I've got hooked into that drama, it's no longer all about them anymore. Because whatever brought me in with my hook has an aspect of a story that is actually my personal stuff that I need to deal with. So, like, the simplest way to say this is, say you came to me and you sort of called me names, and at the same time, when you're telling me that I've got, a pink face and a blue eye, and you're screaming at my face, like literally screaming at me, I would do what you just did, right? You just laughed because I would know that I don't have a pink face and I don't have a blue eye, and that you're not describing my reality. But if you still came in with that same tone and you were calling me a bitch and you were calling me lazy and you were calling me selfish, and I got into the state where I suddenly was defending myself and I was attempting to come back at you because you're wrong, see what's happened here? I haven't laughed at you because I just know that I'm not selfish, and I know that I'm not a bitch, and I know that I'm not lazy. If I knew all of that to be my truth, I wouldn't even react. I'd again just laugh at you. But because I have reacted and I've come in to the hook that you just gave me, it means there's a wound inside me that somewhere is believing that I'm lazy or I'm selfish or I am a bitch or whatever it might be, that because I'm judging myself. So there you go. There's the chance that you have to contemplate on why you got hooked in, and what is it that you believe about yourself, and what is it that you believe about yourself that's completely out of date and irrelevant and not part of who you really are, and it's ready for you to transform it and be done with it so it can disappear, like those quantum physics guys say.
And that's a perfect like example of where conflict becomes an opportunity. But if we continue to, okay, I'm going to talk to this person, you're going to keep going back to them and work on the relationship or communication, it's that when the problem is actually something that got triggered in us, then we're wasting our time and we're actually getting in deeper, distorted kind of situations where, we're actually still giving our power away to that person because we haven't really looked and seen the opportunity that they're just being a mirror to us in some way. And this doesn't mean you put up with abuse, for sure. This does not mean that. In fact, sometimes the lesson is to stop putting up with abuse and to start setting boundaries and speaking up for yourself. So that is included in this talk of opportunities, where find the strength to stand up to someone that's been pushing you around or abusive to you, and not feel guilty and not feel afraid or whatever that needs to be transformed to get to that strong place.
For sure. It's always one of those two things. Either the person is showing you the exact same traits in you, and therefore you're being asked to be humbled, and you are being asked to find some humility, and your ego is being dismantled. Or in fact, the same situation is happening for the polar opposite benefit, and that is you're being asked to get into your healthy ego, and you're being asked to create a boundary and to say no and to preserve yourself and to look after yourself and to be in your power and to use your anger wisely to take care of yourself. So it's always going to be one of those two things. Either you're being humbled or your ego is actually being helped to see the power that it has so it can take care of you. Yeah. But either way, you are gaining something out of the conflict. And it's a lot easier to get more power and to be stronger and to do those aspects of the evolution that is required for us as human beings than it is to discover that, I have been jealous, and I have been competitive, and I have been wanting to pull people's energy down. Like, those things are a lot more painful and regretful and difficult and arduous for our ego to understand and accept and still forgive internally. But both aspects are essential. Otherwise, you're just not going to come into balance, and you're not going to come into a place where you can take care of yourself and at the same time connect with other human beings in a sensible way. Mm-hmm. Because I read something, I think it was Sophia Loren, and she had written this passage about relationships, and it had sort of like a start and an end point on everything. And so it had her points of wisdom in there. And one of the things that she wrote in there at the time when I read it, I didn't understand it again, a little bit like how with the 4 agreements. So she said, when I learned how, and she phrased it like this: when I learned how to hate, I simultaneously learned how to be loved. Mm. And at the time, I didn't understand that at all. I'm like, hatred leads to love? Like, I don't get that, right? But now I understand what that really means, is that when I stood in my power to defend myself in anger, it was the moment at which I took self-love seriously enough so that other people were taught how to love me in return, right? Basically, that's really what the essence of that message is, even though at the time I didn't follow it. Like, how does hatred lead to love?
Yeah, and it's probably the way you described it. I don't even know. I don't think that hatred, though, that kind of anger. And
and I wouldn't have called it hatred, but that's the way that she phrased it in this letter, which didn't make sense to me at the time. But basically, it means getting angry.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because in this discussion, I really want to make that point, is that anger is not always conflict.
Yes.
Sometimes anger is, this is not okay.
That's right.
And it's not like a conflict. It's not like a fight. It's just like, it's sometimes we, you know, if something's happening, it requires, the anger has a certain fire and force to it that gives us space from something that's potentially harmful. You just have to watch where it's almost like an animal kind of primal thing, like, this is my territory. It's just like that. It's very innocent, even if it's like intense. But it's not the same as anger that's like, I'm projecting all these things onto you because it's your fault that I'm not happy. It's your fault that I feel ashamed. It's your fault. That's not protection. That's usually like, there's something going on there.
Yeah, you're offloading.
That's a different kind of anger. And if that's a pattern, then yeah, there's something to be looked at.
Yeah, because that could be your own frustration, and it could be your actual self-hatred and self-loathing that needs to be addressed, rather than the fact that it has anything to do with anybody outside of you. Yeah. But also, when you refer to that type of anger, the sort that you're referring to for yourself, if it has intensity behind it, and or it can be said, can actually be said sternly or calmly, there is a sense of knowing that it's essential and it is as it is. Whereas when the other type of anger comes out, it can be accompanied then with guilt and shame and concern and a sense of, what have I done? And it might be muddled and mixed with all of those other things. And that's another clue that there's something.
And then there's also the anger that's trying to control someone with anger.
Yes.
So that what I call the primal healthy anger, it's not trying to control anyone. In fact, it's letting go of control. It's like letting the fire express itself. But it's like, it's not interested in controlling anyone. It's just like, this is my space.
That's right.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a while to really experience both. To really go, okay, that's that. And that's like, okay, that's me projecting. Yeah. And seeing that. And then, there's the guilt. And if we've been repressing, if we're the type to like, and so I think you were more of the, I'm right, maybe like leaning, and I'm the more, oh, I'm wrong. In fact, even up till like recently, I noticed I'm always like ready to be wrong. Like I apologize, and it's not that it would be things that I made a mistake on, but it's like, hey, just say, oh, I apologize for that. I don't need to grovel. It's silly. But yeah, in the past, I would feel I would lose my temper because I was holding it all in, and then it would get let out.
Yeah.
Then I would feel so guilty, and then I would beat myself up, and then I would lose my temper again. It was just, and
I've done both. I oscillate between the two, feeling guilty for something that I've done and then feeling righteous about something that I've done. I mean, I go through both extremes, but on balance, I think the people that live with me immediately in the home would say I'm more on the category of I need to be right. But you see, even these things, they get borrowed and they get picked up from family members, and they sort of are like part of an ancestral line. So it doesn't matter which end of the spectrum you come from, even that is not you. So it just happens to be a passing behavioral trait that you've picked up until you get to the stage where you get to greater maturity, so that aspect of you doesn't have to come into play too often. Because a lot of people that are doing spiritual growth in particular talk about love as if it's the only emotion that exists inside us.
Or the only one that matters.
Or the only one that matters. And that's not true, because anger exists because it's designed to be used.
And it's beautiful.
And it's in a healthy way.
Yeah, it has.
But not to be designed to be thrown at somebody, but designed to be used for self-guarding and for self-love. So we have to be mindful of the emotions that we are transforming to their polar opposite. And actually, truthfully, a lot of the anger begins to get transformed into compassion. So there's just much less and less of that normal sort of stuff that you would throw onto another person. It does get changed into compassion, but when you need to use it for self-guarding, it will show up.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't disappear. It can still it still can appear if it's necessary. Or even to guide somebody, not just for self-guarding. It can be used when you're in your compassionate heart attempting to help somebody else.
And there's different things that people will hear in different ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just use whatever existence wants to use, whatever it's in its toolbox, and we've got it.
Yeah.
We have that emotion inside of us, especially as women.
Yeah. I mean, we
but
watched that with our teacher, with our guide. I mean, Madda can use a feather with her disciples and her fellow comrades that are on this journey. And she'll just use a feather, or even just like anything, like a little blow, and that's enough for somebody to just topple over, and the ego goes, oh yes, that's me. And then occasionally she has to come out with a machete or a brick, right? Because the ego is so hardened and it's not going to budge from its position. But she'll use the range of things that are available to her out of her compassion and her love to assist you in your growth and in your evolutionary journey.
Yeah.
So,
and I think we need, that there's all these other aspects inside of us that, besides the kind of the fiery part, and there's the part where we actually feel suffering, and we feel the grief over suffering, either ours or people we love, and then there's the sadness and the tears, and these are just like this whole range. I just feel it's just really liberating when we allow ourselves to access whatever is there. Like nothing is wrong, nothing is off limits as far as inner experiences. Yeah.
And certainly from my perspective, if it wasn't for the amount of conflict that I was facing, I wouldn't have come to this journey. But the amount of conflict I was facing did leave me feeling like a victim, did leave me feeling extremely sorry for myself, and did bring me to a point where at times I was contemplating not wanting to be on this planet. In fact, my first Dalian method session was all about being ready to check out. And so the sense of desperation around the level of conflict in my home had brought me to my knees. But it's that same thing that became the single unique gem that has helped the rebirth process and the transformation process and the reconnection with the love for life. Like this morning I woke up and I came out of the covers of the bed and it's like, oh, thank you, I'm still alive. I can still keep breathing. So like but all of this that I have in its peak moments and its great moments has only arisen from those desperately dark and dismal and difficult days. And in my case, a lot of the arguments were centered around my husband and I. Like we were like two bulls at each other's heads.
And that's a good point, because I think a lot of what's behind when people become suicidal, I think a lot of it can be from relationships.
Yeah.
Create those like you said, the desperation and feeling trapped or feeling no way out or feeling you don't have any control in some way or another. And
not knowing why it's happening. And not knowing why it's happening at a basic level. You have a set of circumstances that's not palatable, and then you have you, and they're showing up like relentlessly. There comes a point where you think there's something wrong with you, like you were saying earlier in one of the other episodes about feeling alone and that you felt there was something wrong with you. So you get to a point where you feel there's something wrong with you, and then the only solution you have, because you think there's something wrong with you, is to check out. Because it's all too much and it's all too overwhelming and it's all too difficult to deal with. But if somehow we were being educated that this event here that arose came in here like this, so that you are like this to start with, and then you become that, and you become that, and you become that, and you become that, and you become this, and then you become huge, and then it becomes limitless. Like if we had some of this education arising early enough in our sort of evolution, we wouldn't be so terrified of the mess that comes in. We'd have more sense of, okay, I understand this mess is coming for a reason. It's painful, it's difficult, I don't want it. Given a choice, I'd rather not have it. But actually, the person who's going to uncreate this and the person who's going to actually find a way through this is me. So by checking out or running away, guess what? It's not going to go away. So I still have to do something with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I watched a psychic video, which was on YouTube, and it was a lady that channels in people that have died. And she was sobbing her eyes out, Leela, because she was talking about those that commit suicide. And she was talking about the pain that's not resolved at the point of suicide, how it even intensifies even more when you've crossed planes, and you still have to process it, because the pain, basically, bottom line, is saying that you don't know how to receive love. And so you still have to go through the anguish until you're ready to embrace the light and love. So we can't really run away from something, because it's still going to be there.
Yeah, and then the thing is, the way out is to do this work. It's actually, and I think people have to kind of come to that place of like, there's no other way out.
Yeah.
I tried it. You know, of course we didn't kill ourselves. We're lucky that we didn't go that far, but yeah, it's the only way, because I think something inside of us, you know, even if we've thought about that and had those thoughts and maybe fantasized about it, I think we both knew deep down it's not an out of the pain.
But I didn't really know what the solution was, though, either. So, and I didn't really understand the depth of why it's so important to go in. Because at the early stages, I still just wanted my outer reality fixed. The motivation was still there, that I just want this outer world to change. And that's what is going to give me joy, and that's what's going to make me happier. And once it's all changed and it's all fixed and it's all resolved, then I've got my utopia. I would never have really understood the depth of gain by going in and what's possible for us until I actually started doing it. So, and that's the only thing that I can really encourage people to do, is if you're hurting and your relationships are not working and you're finding yourself in a lot of conflict, it does take courage to go in, but there's only one upside, and that is you're going to find your way into the light. So even if there's fear and you don't feel like you can muster up the courage, remember that you're the creator of the world that you're wanting, and it can't be done by any other person at all. Yeah.
I think those are good final words.
Perfect.
Thank you, Kindi.
Oh, bless you as well, Leela. I love chatting with you. We look forward to the next one that we do.
Yes. Thank you.